Just a disclaimer. This isn't considered medical advice. It's educational purposes only. So since it's not medical advice, don't perceive it as medical advice. If you have a health condition, please do seek out a qualified healthcare provider. So I mentioned Ellie's in California. I learned that he's self-realized. Hopefully he's going to define that. Many people are struggling, suffering, and overwhelmed. And Ellie has his personal story. Again, I hope he shares, because so many people are new, struggling, suffering, physical disease, anxiety. And through this self-realization process, the shit show can be going on outside, and yet there's a sense of peace inside. There's that Buddhist expression, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. And so hopefully he'll talk about that as well. But as I mentioned, he is a trained psychotherapist. He actually is a supervisor too, for psychotherapists, and he offers self-realization one-on-one and group work. And he's even edited a couple of books by Philip Weber as well that hopefully he'll share. Ellie, can you introduce yourself? Because some people here don't know who you are. And then I'm just curious how we're going to start this. I'm reminding everybody, in the chat, post your questions. I'm going to moderate those. If you want to ask your question verbally, put up your hand. How to do that is on the bottom of your Zoom screen. There should be a heart shape called React. You actually have to click on it, and then there'll be like emoji things, but there will be a raise hand option. And that's how you raise your hand. And then we'll know to give you mic rights so you can ask your question. Please be concise when you ask your questions. And please note that this is a group educational experience. This does not have the scope to do one-on-one psychotherapy. So keep that in mind when you're asking your questions, please. Ellie, welcome to your first community lecture on healthy seminars. Thanks for being brave and trusting me to hold the space for you so you can do what you do so well.
Oh my gosh, Lorne, thank you so much. Very warm welcome. You're too kind. I really appreciate all that, and I enjoy our collaboration a lot. So I think we're stronger together. So it's really nice to be able to connect and do this and make this offering. I also wanted to just add to how this all started, add my piece to it, which is that at the time that you were offering this option to do a webinar, a virtual group with me, I was seriously considering creating a virtual group as well. So it seemed to be just perfect timing, and the universe coincided in the right way. And it just felt like once you offered it to me, it was like, yeah, let's do it. It sounds perfect. So it seems like it was a mutual thing.
You know, when
Uh,
the universe asks, I usually listen, because when you don't, it can hurt.
yes. Yes, if you've ever heard the phrase, first the universe whispers, then it will say it to you, then it will yell it to you, and then it will hit you over the head with a frying pan if you don't listen. So good to listen to the universe. So yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate all that you're doing here, the offering. Thank you to Patty also for tech help and Lauren's team. He has a great team behind him. So with that, let me introduce myself. So I'm Ellie. I think Lauren gave me a very nice introduction already, but this is the first of 5 webinars, and the theme is bridging psychology and spirituality. So I thought, I could start by just sharing a bit of my story and how I ended up in the position that I'm in today. So for those of you who've heard my story before, it'll be a little bit of a repeat, but I'm just going to do a brief summary here, just for those who don't know me. So let's see, I'll start just with my interest in psychology and spirituality. They both kind of came on the scene when I was in my early teen years. I was always a very curious, very introverted kid, always just had a very strong thirst for knowledge. And so whatever I could put my mind around or grasp, I would read a lot, I would learn a lot. Um, so let's see, my introduction to spirituality started with the Tao Te Ching, essentially, which is an Eastern spiritual philosophical text that it's basically the central scripture for Taoism. And it's the fundamental premise is that, there's the Tao, there's the oneness, the great integrity is what it's called, the harmony of all life. And when we stop resisting, we enter into the flow. So it's all about non-resistance. And so learning about the Tao Te Ching was my first introduction to the Eastern or the spiritual dimension of life. And then with psychology, again, in my early teens, my older sister, was really interested in psychology. Somehow she knew when she was little that she always wanted to be a therapist. So she was very interested in that, and she introduced me to psychological concepts and principles. And I remember during my family vacations, when we were in a room together, we would just have these deep discussions late into the night, analyzing, our family dynamics. And she was just teaching me all these concepts of psychology. And looking back, I would say that it was somewhat of kind of an awakening moment having those conversations with her because they were so impactful. So those were the two kind of avenues that I felt made sense, the spiritual and the psychological. They both gave me a lens through which I could see the world, and they helped to make sense of not only myself, but my family and the world at large. So that's how it started. And, I carried those interests throughout my life. In my early late teens and in college, I majored in psychology. So you can see I carried that with me. And after college, I found Paramahansa Yogananda's meditation techniques, the Self-Realization Fellowship path, and I started to study his teachings and his meditations. And those were the two kind of primary avenues for both of my interests. Around in my early 20s, I had a lot of health issues, and those were kind of impulses that accelerated my interest in both fields. So when I was 18, I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, which was very painful. I also came down with sciatica, and I had some pretty bad anxiety and some depression as well. So all those put together really drew me deeper into the spiritual and the psychological paths. Um, and what I learned over time through many, many outlets and many experiences and doctors and professionals, I learned that a huge component of my physical illness and pain was psychological and emotional. So it was psychosomatic. So I started to learn about the mind-body connection, and how it's all, really one system that influences many, many aspects of our lives. And so I went down this rabbit hole of healing the psychological aspects as well. So, um, in tandem with my meditation and spiritual practices, I also went really heavy into psychotherapy, and that also inspired me to become a counselor. So that's kind of what happened externally. Internally, what started to happen as I went on this journey was that as I continued to open up the psyche and explore it, and release all these trapped emotions and energies, which I do go into a little bit in the interview with Lauren that we did not too long ago. Um, as I started to open up my consciousness and release all of this emotionally suppressed, psychologically suppressed material, what started to happen was the ego started to dissolve naturally. So there was just this gradual, and sometimes not so gradual. There were events as well, but mostly gradually, that the ego just started to fall away, or rather, I would say the ego identity started to fall away. And what took its place was this dawning of awareness, which I soon realized was my true nature. So that's how I ended up here, where I am. And you can see that in my own life, um, kind of bridging the psychology and the spirituality is what led me to where I am today. The modern psychological knowledge with the timeless spiritual wisdom, um, that worked for me. And so that's what I want to offer to others as well. So, how's that for an intro, Lauren?
Yeah, thanks for that. And I'm going to fill in or make some comments is, the reason I was interested in interviewing you and bringing you to our group today is the self-realization part. Often, I mean, I used to have that image that, you'd be wearing robes and a beard and people would be washing your feet like a guru. And there seems to be a lot of talk about near-death experiences and awakenings, self-realizations. And from the outside, you may not know. Nobody would know. They could be pumping gas, serving you at the restaurant, be your therapist, and yet their internal experience is very different. Maybe your nervous system may pick up on that and you feel a little bit more calmer in their presence, or your healing is a little bit accelerated with these individuals. But realistically, you can only see based on your lens. So you may not even notice these people being self-realized. And I thought it'd be nice because for that, the growth or the evolution that's possibly happening in our human experience right now in our collective, um, it seems easier when we start to see, oh, the waitress did it, the gas attendant did it, the psychotherapist, how'd you do it, and how are you now? My understanding from your story, you had physical diseases, ulcerative colitis, you had severe anxiety, and our understanding is that you see the colitis is not curable, but through your emotional work, you don't have symptoms of colitis anymore.
That's right.
You don't have anxiety anymore,
Mm-mm.
and you're not medicated right now.
Mm-mm.
Okay. So
Nope.
I wanted to invite you on because people are like, there's people like, well, I have overwhelm, I have anxiety, I have all these physical complaints, and I'd like to have peace and equanimity. And I want to know what that's about, because many people, if you're over 40 anyhow, most people know that there's not enough money to fix it. There's no relationship that's going to fix it. There's no new job that's going to fix it. No new house that's going to fix it. We've lived long enough to know that nothing in the external world will fix it. Maybe temporary, give us some pleasure, but
Mm-hmm.
we also know that that pleasure that used to last for years or months, for some of us, last minutes, an hour, not even till the next day, right? And so people
Right.
are starting to turn inward, and that's why I wanted you to share your personal story and come today, because when you look at you,
Yes.
you don't have the robe, and if I saw you on the street, I wouldn't know, what you're self-realized. Can you talk more about what self-realization is today as part of your
Yes,
lecture?
I'm going to.
Okay,
I'm
great.
going to. Yeah, I have a little presentation, a little PowerPoint that I created, that I'm going to get into, that goes into that. Um, so, so let me see. This kind of ties into what I feel is something I can offer, that spirituality and psychology are kind of two sides of the same coin. I see that spirituality gives us, an understanding of what's beyond the mind, truth, true nature, and psychology helps us understand the mind, and in the world of relativity. So you've got the spiritual piece, which is the absolute, the kind of the framework, what gives us context and meaning and purpose. And then you have the psychological piece, which is the relative and in the world. And it also, I think, is a equally important component to life. So I'm going to get into that and define those two. Um, Especially for those on the spiritual path, if you're wanting to transcend the ego, which is what the spiritual path is all about, then you have to understand what the ego is, first of all, in order to transcend it. And that's where psychology comes in, is that the psychology is really the study of ego, essentially, and human behavior. And so it's important, I think, to put the two fields together. And I think we're headed in that direction. It's going there. But I think there's still quite a bit of work to do there. So let's see. So I'm going to share a PowerPoint. I made a little presentation mainly just for images because I find that syncing into some images as I'm talking can sometimes help, especially for visual learners. So that's what I'm going to do. But please feel free to chime in or interrupt, Lauren, if you want to. If anything's unclear, let me know. My intention is always to be as clear and precise as possible. And I'm interested in having a dialogue with all of you guys too, who are here. And the idea that I had for these 5 webinars is that I'm going to start pretty broad. I want to start big picture so we all have kind of a general framework that we're working with. And then as we progress through the webinars, we're going to attempt to go into more specifics. I just find that to be useful. So let me start with the PowerPoint. Let me share.
And everybody keep posting your questions because we're collecting those and I'll moderate those. Sometimes I'll interrupt Ellie. Sometimes I'll wait until we have a little bit of a pause for Q&A.
Sounds good. Okay. So I want to start with the fundamental premise that everything is one. So this is the basic truth that one comes to realize when self-realization dawns. And so I find that it's important to first establish this. Now, there are some people who might nitpick at this and say, well, there isn't really oneness. There's even beyond that. There's actually nothing and nothing happening. And so I'll say, yes, that's true. But for the purposes of our presentation, this is the kind of fundamental truth that we're going to stick with here. I think that we already have more than enough to work with. So the reason why I want to establish that everything is one is because once we get the conversation going, we're going to start dividing things up into more pieces. But I don't want us to forget the basic truth that everything is one, that that's really what it all comes down to. That, there is diversity within the unity and there's unity within the diversity. And so I created this image through AI of the yin yang, which is a Taoist symbol, because I think it perfectly conveys the unity within the diversity and the diversity within the unity. So that's kind of the basic theme of today. So this assertion of oneness can't really be proven. You can't scientifically measure it, but you can experience it. You can live it or know it through direct perception and intuition. And that's what we're going to get into. So I'm going to keep coming back to this essential point that everything is one. So as we start from the oneness, let's start dividing now. You could say that there are two of us. We have a soul and we have an ego. So how I define the soul, ultimately they're one. They're one and the same. But the soul, I would say, is sort of the inward facing self. That's how I define it. It's the spark of the divine that's within us. It's our true nature, our being. It's awareness itself. And then you have the ego, which is kind of our little self. It believes that it's separate and cut off from the rest of life. It operates mostly on the mental level. That's where it originates, whereas the soul originates on the spiritual level or the dimension of source or truth. The ego is kind of a step down from that. And it's the aspect of ourself that is outward facing and that believes that it's separate from the rest of the world, that there's a me and there's a not me. Okay. And that's the fundamental illusion that there's separateness. So it divides things, it categorizes things, it judges things, it overlays onto the oneness of reality. And again, there's no real division between the ego and the soul. but it's helpful for our purposes to divide it up so we can start to understand what's really going on here. Um, so with that, um, because we have this inward facing self and this outward facing self, we have two journeys that we go on. There's the inward journey and the outward journey. So the outward journey, the ego's journey, is what's called self-actualization. And this is essentially the goal of all of psychology. I don't want to make a huge generalization here, but most psychologists or most therapists in one way or another, whether they call it self-actualization or not, they actually, that's really what the goal is. It's to self-actualize. It's to, and I'll get it a little more into what self-actualization means. Um, and because we have the soul or the inward facing self, there's the journey of self realization, which is actually the goal of spirituality. So they seem opposites, they seem contradictory, but they're actually the same process. And I want to explain how that's true and show how we can put them together. Because to me, that feels like the magic combination for life. So, self actualization is more about doing, self realization is more about being. Um, there are some spiritual teachers who actually put self actualization underneath the umbrella of self realization. Like if you look at, Yogananda's teachings, for example, I think if you look closely, he does talk about self actualization, but it's under the greater context of self realization. But then there are other teachers, spiritual teachers, who don't have that included. And self realization is just about getting in touch with true nature and being. And it's got nothing to do with the outside world, nothing to do with the mind, heart, body system. It's all about transcending that. So I felt that it was useful to actually bring awareness to both processes. Um, okay. Any questions, Lauren?
We do have some questions. I was going to wait for you
Okay.
to finish this.
Okay.
Although I will bring one that could probably get tied into based on based on that slide, if I may.
Okay.
And it
Sure.
was just they asked it earlier, but they want to know if you could elaborate as you're teaching as well on ego and ego identity, comparing how Western psychology and from the like a Chinese medicine or the Tao Te Ching perceive differently this idea of ego.
Hmm.
And a follow up to that is they're curious to know in the context of dissolving the ego, what is meant by one's true nature versus a person knowing things about themselves, such as maybe they're a kind, gentle, loving person.
Sure. Um, can you repeat the first question again?
Yeah. Can you elaborate on ego and ego identity, comparing how Western psychology versus Oriental or Tao Te Ching idea, the TCM perspective? How do you see them? They differ. They differ because you're trained from
Sure.
a psychology perspective.
Yeah, yeah.
You have your self realization that I don't know if they teach that anywhere, and then you did study the Tao Te Ching as well.
Yeah, so the ego, so first of all, if you've listened to my interview with Lauren, I do go into quite a bit of detail about the ego and how there's kind of separate functions of the ego. There's the psychological function of ego, which is just the interface that we use to navigate life. And then there's the separative ego, which is that aspect of the ego that believes itself to be separate. So ego is always there before and after self-realization. But after self-realization, the separative ego falls away, and there's just the ego function, the psychological framework that's left. So what I mean by ego versus ego identity, ego's always there after self-realization also, but there's no longer an identification with the ego. You recognize it as just a tool that you use to navigate life.
Would that mean
Um,
then you wouldn't identify yourself as a kind, loving person? Because that could be an identity of that ego version.
sure, that's right. Yeah, that would be a story, an ego story that you're telling yourself that I am kind, I am generous, I am nice, etc., etc. Whereas if you were self-realized, you might be all those things, but you're not necessarily telling yourself that. You're just being it.
And in real life, if your ego thinks it's kind, loving, and then somebody reacts in a way that tells you you're not kind and loving, that probably would be a big trigger for the ego, but not the
Right.
self-realized part, because the self-realized part is okay when it's an asshole as well as when it's kind.
Yeah, exactly.
um,
Exactly.
can you touch a little bit on this part? Because I know I came into this until I had my own inner process experience where it shifted, and we talk about this in the podcast. But so many teachings seems to want to vilify the ego and
Hmm.
destroy the ego. And my experience was when I was able to integrate, call the ego shadow, right? My repressed stuff. When it became, when I started integrating it, come alongside it, that's when the suffering changed, the resistance changed, and it was a whole different
Hmm.
experience. And you and
Hmm.
I came up with similar metaphors. I always said, like, life is really messed up when you have the ego running the show and the higher self down below, and you flip it. So now the higher self's there, but the ego's still there. You need it in this human experience. I think you had a
Hmm.
similar way where you talked about one's more in the front, one's more in the back.
Yeah,
I think that would
exactly.
be a good thing to discuss because many people have come here thinking ego's bad, but I don't think you're saying ego's bad.
Ego is not bad, but you do, if you want self-realization, you do have to destroy the identification with ego. You have to realize that that's not what you really are. Your true nature is not a mind or an identity. Your true nature is spirit or awareness or being, which is always there. It's permanent. It's the backdrop, of all of life, and that's your true nature. So, okay, cool. So with that, let's go into a little bit of what self-actualization is, and then we'll do self-realization, and then we'll put them all together. So, for those of you who are familiar, self-actualization, I think, was first coined by Abraham Maslow in the 50s, and he made this hierarchy of needs. This is my version of the hierarchy of needs, a little simpler. But essentially, again, it's the ego's outward journey. It's the goal of psychology, and it's essentially a process of fulfillment or acquiring. So the idea is that, if you follow the arrow up, first, now again, it's not so linear, but it doesn't always have to happen in this order, in order of body, heart, mind, but most often it does. So the first layer is sort of you have to fulfill, it's about fulfilling and acquiring needs and desires. So the first layer is fulfilling your physical or your physiological needs. So that's like, food, water, shelter, safety, sleep, warmth, that kind of thing. The theory is that once you have that figured out, then you move on to the next layer of fulfillment of your needs and desires, which is your heart's needs and desires, like love, belonging, family, relationships, that kind of thing, the heart needs. And then once you fulfilled that, you move on to your mental needs or your psychological needs, which are, self-esteem, confidence, sometimes prestige or status, success, accomplishment, and even identity. And so the idea with self-actualization, which was proposed by Maslow and also perpetuated by psychologists like Carl Rogers, who's one of my favorites, uh, once you've gotten all those layers, you arrive at this sort of endpoint called self-actualization, which is essentially the highest level that the ego can go. You've gone so far out, you fulfilled the body's needs, you fulfilled the heart's needs and the mind's needs, and you've integrated all the different aspects of your human identity into one kind of centralized ego function. So it's an integration of all the psyche's parts into a unified identity. And it means that you're essentially fulfilling your dreams, you're living your best life, you've got creativity, and your potential has been reached, right? However, um, self-actualization is only one half of the coin. And for those of you who have pursued it, you know that it isn't going to lead to ultimate fulfillment. So I don't know if you guys know this, but at the end of Maslow's life, about a year before he died, he published a paper that actually added another step to self-actualization, beyond self-actualization, called self-transcendence. And this one, he says, rather than the sort of ego um, actualization, which is sort of all about the self, fulfilling the self's needs, self-transcendence, the next step in the journey, is a sort of reopening up to others and the world. So it's a reorientation towards service. And so this is where we get into self-realization. I think Maslow, I don't know exactly why Maslow proposed this, but I suspect it's because he probably reached a level of relative self-actualization. And then he said to himself, I'm still not satisfied. What's going on here? It can't be the final step. There's got to be something more. And he discovered that there was this reorientation towards others or towards service. So that brings us to self-realization, which seems to be, it's kind of like the inverse journey. And rather than with self-actualization, it's a process of fulfillment or acquiring. Self-realization is a process of transcendence or letting go. But it seems contradictory, but it's not, because you're not letting go of the things that you've acquired. You're letting go of your identity with the things that you've acquired. So rather than self-actualization being more embracing your humanity, self-realization is more embracing your divinity. And it's about expanding your identity outward to include everything rather than self-actualization, which is this sort of narrowing of your identity. So with self-realization, again, if you follow the arrow up, that's kind of the general trend that you're going to find. Again, it's not always linear. There are, it's possible to jump right into self-realization without letting go of these other layers, because self-realization, again, is our true nature. Our true nature is spirit or awareness. So that's always there, and we can always drop in there. But if you haven't done these lower layers of de-identification, you're going to, you're not going to be able to stay there permanently for very long in the awareness of your true nature. So, first, because the ego is most outward facing, and because we are identified with the ego, most people are, it's this process of withdrawing our awareness, withdrawing our energy from the outside world back inside. So first you have to transcend the body, which looks like, material pleasures, objects, physical sensations. Now that means, it doesn't mean that you don't have those things anymore. It just means that they no longer give you fulfillment, that you realize that they're not the end all be all of life. Once you can release those needs, then you move on to the heart. You transcend the emotions, the feelings, the energies, and you realize that that's not who I am either. And then you move on to the mind, which is the deepest layer of the ego, the deepest layer inside, second to awareness itself. And you start to realize that you let go of your beliefs, you let go of this identity, you let go of any mental concepts, thoughts, images, things like that. Now, that doesn't mean, again, that you don't have those things. You still have a body, heart, mind, but you realize that you're not those things, you're the spirit. So, the important thing is that it's self-realization is not about avoiding, it's not about negating, it's about transcending. It's about not identifying or attaching to the things of this world, which include the body, the heart, and the mind's materials. So it's rather than self-actualization being an additive process, self-realization is a subtractive process. And just like self-actualization is an integration of the psyche into a unified identity, self-realization is an integration of life into a unified field of awareness. So you could say that self-realization is a macrocosm of self-actualization. It's going, of the microcosm of self-actualization. So does that make sense so far?
So far, and there's a clarification question. You
Okay,
mean you mean one has achieved self-realization once, but will keep doing the process of transcendence infinitely?
that's true. Yeah. So in reality, I would say both processes go on infinitely. I think there is a point that you reach where you could say, okay, I'm self-actualized, or you could say, okay, I'm self-realized, but the journeys go on forever.
And when you talked about the letting go, because in many traditions they get rid of everything, right? All the material
Yeah,
possessions.
yeah,
And I don't think I was interpreting what you're saying that way. You're just not identified with them. So you can enjoy them. They can bring pleasure, but pleasure is temporary. So in that aspect of letting go or not being identified, you can enjoy the car, you can enjoy the relationship, the praise, but you're not identified with it. So if it doesn't come or it's removed, you don't have this big drop because in that
exactly,
self-realization part, you're fulfilled already. So you're fulfilled, you're at peace, you have low level joy or bliss. And then every once in a while you have a little spike in pleasure, but you realize it's pleasure. Like I'm going to enjoy this ice cream.
exactly.
I'm going to enjoy this chocolate ice cream. But after the ice cream, I may jump on the scale and not have the pleasure that I had while I was eating the
Yes,
ice cream.
exactly. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this to you today is because there is that misconception that self-realization is all about kind of escaping the world. I had that misconception as well. And I think that does some damage. So I want to really highlight that self-realization and self-actualization go together. They actually are one process and they enhance each other. They feed into each other. So that goes into my next slide, putting them together. So I personally believe that from my own experience and also from what I've gathered, is that both of them put together are really the magic combination. It was for me. If you go so far into self-realization, but you ignore or negate the things of the world, then you're really one-sided. And you might know your true nature, but you're not going to be very well adjusted in the world, and you might end up hurting people. And so, how good is that really? I mean, you won't suffer, which is it's priceless. But without the self-actualization piece, you don't have a stable ego to be able to operate in the world and help others. And what self-realization wants, once you realize that you are all things and that all things are you, is that love comes through and you want to help others through that, through whatever suffering or whatever experiences they're having. So the psychological piece or the ego, which no longer is your identity, is still a very important piece. You still have to use the mind, heart, body system in order to live in this world. So I believe that if you put both paths together, contrary to what some teachers teach, if you put both paths together, you can actually achieve your full human potential, where you know your true nature and you no longer suffer, but also you're able to help others and enjoy life, just like you were saying, Lauren. I mean, you can enjoy the things of the world. You don't have to negate them. Buddha talked about the middle way, and I think that's partly what he was talking about, is
Yeah,
that there's this middle way. Go
the middle
ahead.
way. Ellie, if you were going to talk to your much younger self, which one would you'd want to develop first or most, is because
Yeah,
it sounds like self-realization versus self-actualization. If you were to ask your younger self, and I'll add it to, because nothing's ever like 50-50. Like, people talk about marriage, it's a 50-50. Yeah, maybe over 90 years, but 60% of it's on the wife the first couple of years. Then maybe it's 50% on the wife after that. Then maybe there's a couple of years it's 70% on the husband and 80%. And over 90 years, it could look like a 50-50 relationship. But in any one
mm-hmm,
year, it's never really 50-50.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So if you're going to talk to your
Yeah.
younger self, it looks like based on our world, we tend to work on the self-actualization. It seems like that's what we're all doing. And then
Yes.
we come to a point where we're struggling. It's hurt so bad that we're like, what do I need to do? And somebody goes, you got to do inner work. And then we start to do the self-realization. That's what's
Exactly.
happening in our world. I'm curious if you could
Yes.
go back and talk to yourself, which do you think is the a healthy order in order
Yes.
to live your life?
So, if you're asking me in order of priority, I would put self-realization as number one. I think that's the most important piece. And then put self-actualization second. So you don't want to let go of either of them. But if I had to choose, I would encourage people to do to prioritize self-realization. Go inside first because that's the source of all life. Get in touch with your being. And then once you're in touch with your being, that's when the doing will emerge naturally out of your being. That's when the self-actualization will take place. So definitely prioritize self-realization. But of course, it's up to you. You know, it's up to each person how they want to do this. But eventually, one will feed into the other. They cycle through each other. You will come back around. So let's say you go through self-actualization all the way, like Maslow, I think, discovered, you're going to realize, okay, I'm this integrated ego. You know, I have everything I've ever wanted, but I'm not fulfilled or I'm suffering. So now what do I do? Okay, now you're going to come back around and do self-realization. If you start with self-realization, you're going to go so far in that you realize your true nature, you're no longer suffering, but then you're going to realize that your true nature is love, and you're going to come back around to try and help others in the world. And in order to be able to help others, you have to have a stable ego, a stable mind, heart, body system. So you're going to end up coming back around and working on that, whether you like it or not. So no matter which way you spin it, you end up in the same place, which is the integration of both. But if you're asking me, I would say start with self-realization. If you can do both, do both. Um, how's
I like
that?
this. Yeah, I wanna unpack that a bit because
Okay.
I have this expression, right action follows right thinking. And so the way you describe this, if you were to talk to your younger self, self-realization is where you want to wait it at the beginning. This also supports your idea of the higher self is in front and the ego's in the background, or I said the
Yeah.
higher self
Yeah.
here and there.
Yeah.
That way, the right part of you is running the show on this planet Earth because your actions are the vibration behind the action comes from your beingness. So if your beingness
Hmm.
is fear and lack, and the actions are identical versus your beingness being whole and complete, although
Hmm.
the actions look identical from the outside because the vibration behind them, one has self-realization, whole and complete, one's coming from fear and lack, usually you get more of the same. So the fear and lack person will get more fear and lack, and the other person will get more abundance. So it
Hmm.
sounds like right action follows right thinking. That self-realization part seems to be really important because it will change the quality of your doing this in this world.
That's right. Exactly. It's the backdrop of everything. It has to be the primary piece. So, yeah, so again, this goes back to the unity and the diversity together, the soul and the ego together, the inner and the outer together. Once you put them together, you realize that it's actually one. There's one process going on here, but it depends on which angle you want to tackle it from. So the question then becomes, okay, this sounds like a tall order. You know, how do I put them together? And I'll simplify it. What I see as the bridge between self-realization and self-actualization is love. Because love is it's that unifying force. It's the energy that comes, you could say it is our true nature. It's what everything is. It's the awareness itself is a loving awareness. Um, if you love, and love means loving yourself, your individual self, and others, you're inevitably, if you follow the path of love, you will inevitably find yourself integrating both of these two paths because love will pull you in to yourself and love will push you out to the world. That's the dynamic energy or the dynamic force of this world. So if you want to put them together, focus on love. Focus on being as loving as you can be. Focus on service to others and seeing everything as yourself.
Can we unpack that a bit more? Because,
Sure.
love, interesting, some of the people I've been prepping for some future interviews and people I spoke to, love seems to be, even scientists, when, we keep distilling down, distilling down, distilling down. We're like, so what is it? What's the healing? What? And they go, it's love, right? But they're not talking romantic love, not this love that we see in
Mm.
the Hollywood movies. So can you unpack a little bit of what this love vibration is? Because I think it's at risk of this spiritual bypass. Like, in your heart is hate, resentment, but you're pretending to be loving, right? um
Yeah.
so I don't think you can, the subconscious and what goes on the ether, I don't know if you can really hide that. I heard being service to others. um I know Gordon Neufeld, somebody I've interviewed, he has this understanding from attachment theory that when somebody truly feels seen and heard, they feel loved, right? So that's that why I find when we do witness consciousness, when we do awareness practices and feel our feelings and come alongside them, the work I do in my practice and what I know you're doing in your practice, having some compassion for that part of you, there's
Exactly.
a part of you that's being seen and heard, right?
Hmm.
And as Neufeld says, that equals loved. And that there's a healing that happens because something's been accepted. Like, so
Yeah,
self-acceptance could be love. Can you unpack love?
definitely.
Because there's a lot of people going around pretending to be loving. I'm wondering if they're loving versus manipulating, or trying to
Yeah.
pretend they're something they're not.
Yeah. So the love that I'm talking about is really a universal love. It's not a personal love, although personal love can be included in it, right? We're not negating anything. But it's a universal love, where you see everything as yourself. You see that all things in creation, everybody that you interact with is your own self. And what is it that you want to do but be as kind to yourself as you can be? So service to others is one component of that, but also service to yourself is one component of that because you're equally, your finite form is equally part of this creation, as is everything else. So that includes loving yourself, being compassionate to yourself. If you have hate in your heart, okay, that's not quite loving, but can you accept that? That's loving. Can you accept that you have hate in your heart and release that without acting on it?
So there's the key. And in my approach, we've talked about this: notice, accept, choose again. So I want it, because the loving's so broad, so I want to bring it down to be practical.
Yeah.
My
Yeah, I
experience, what I work
appreciate
with,
that.
the people I work with, when, so I want to repeat what I think I heard is, if there's like resentment, jealousy, even hate in your heart, can you accept that? So, because when you don't accept it, you amplify it, actually, you create resistance.
That's
We're not
right.
saying you like it, we're not saying you're resigned to it. Can you accept it? I think that process of learning to accept it doesn't mean you like it or resign to it, but just accept there's that in you.
Yeah,
That is a form of witnessing, that
that's
you
right.
start to tune into the witness consciousness, and it transforms it, because it's not it. You've been identified with your resentment, you've been identified with your hate. The ego's at the forefront. And when you start this practice, I call notice accepting, and use tools to come alongside it with compassion and just observe it and allow it and accept it lovingly, as you said, right?
Hmm.
Then you shift, and now that other aspect of you comes to the forefront and the ego to the
Exactly.
background, and you said you let it go, so this thing moves through you and gets released, because it was never you, it was just stuck inside this meat sack of the human body. They got stuck,
Yes.
and it
Yes.
now moved through. And as you said earlier, you're not adding, you're taking away. And so by taking away, removing this stuck energy, you now get to experience more of your true self, which is peace and joy.
Yes. Yes.
So
That's right.
that's a considered an act of loving.
I agree. Yes. And the thing is, when you put the inner and the outer together, that is love. That is loving because you're unifying the world. You're unifying life itself. Love is that unifying aspect of life. So the inner and the outer, again, ultimately everything is one, but if we're dividing it, the inner and the outer need to make contact with one another in order to be able to transform. Again, it's the middle way. If you only have the inner and there's no outer to reflect it, then there's really nothing happening. If you only have the outer but no inner to reflect it, then you're unconscious essentially. So you need both to interact with each other. They need to make contact. That's the sweet spot. That's where the transformation happens. So I want to use an analogy here, or a metaphor, the dream metaphor, to drive home the point that I'm trying to make. So the dream metaphor, this is a popular metaphor in spiritual circles, that when you awaken in self-realization, you wake up out of the dream, right? You realize that everything's a dream and you wake up out of the dream. Um, that you realize that everything is God's dream or it's a play of consciousness. Um, and it's not actually what it's like, but it's a really good felt sense way to understand what it's like. So while that's true, I want to add a little tweak to it, which is that you might be waking up out of the dream, but you're also waking up in the dream, meaning you're still in the dream. And you realize not only that you're in the dream, but you are the dream itself. So in that way, it's more like a lucid dream. There's one part of you that's leaving the dream totally, but there's also a part of you that's staying in the dream. And that is, there's a oneness there. So this metaphor of the dream, I think, is really helpful. It's a really subtle but important shift because it shows you that you're still in the dream. I mean, you know it's a dream now, but you're still operating in the dream as a mind, heart, body system. So self-realization will wake you up to the fact that it's a dream. But if you're still operating in the dream or playing a role in the dream, you want the dream to be a good dream, don't you? Rather than a nightmare. So that's where self-actualization comes in, is you still want to take care of these things in the world. So you need both in order to have this full, complete life. So in this, I made, again, another AI image. Um, I had the person in the background, this big self, that's the soul, that's the true nature, and it's witnessing the little self, the ego, that's operating in 3D reality or 4D reality. And I made the little self chopping wood and carrying water because of that metaphor. Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Your external life is still going to be relatively the same, but your inner perception or experience is going to be radically different. But there's still this play within form. And I think that's a misunderstanding that a lot of people have, is that when I wake up, I'm gone. I'm no longer here. But you are. You're still playing a role. You just now know that it's a dream. So they're both useful, but if I had to choose, wake up to realize that it's a dream first. Did you want to say something,
Yeah.
Lauren? I think you're muted.
Then you won't take it personally, and that will
Yeah,
probably reduce the chance of you suffering in
exactly.
the dream. Because
Yeah,
just like when you're at a movie, you don't take it personally what's going on in the scene, or if you're an actor in a play, you don't take it personally.
yeah, that's right. You're like, yeah, exactly. You're playing a role.
Yeah.
It's not your true self. And that I think is the the perfect ingredient for living a totally happy and fulfilling life, is that you merge the inner and the outer. You don't negate one or the other. You merge them together. And there's this beautiful dance between spirit and nature, right? Between the form and the formless, between being and doing. That's the unity and the diversity dancing together. That's the love and the wisdom dancing together. Um, and that's where you get that richness, the actual and the potential. So let me close up my presentation with one final slide. It's a poem or a quote from John Welwood, who's a transpersonal psychologist and spiritual author, and he summarizes much better than I can what I'm saying. So, drawing on both the wisdom of East and West, of West and East, Um, so let me just pause there real quick. Wisdom of the West is all about kind of the outward self-actualization. Wisdom of the East is self-realization. Drawing on the wisdom of both West and East, we could say that to be human is to be vulnerable and indestructible at the same time. Fully inhabiting our humanness involves a willingness to open fully to the rawness of creaturely existence and feel what it is like to be subject to hurt, limitation, conditioning, and death. Transcending our humanness means gaining access to the larger domain of pure being and limitless awareness that's not bound by conditioned existence at all. Being fully human means honoring both these truths, immanence, or fully engaging with our humanness, and transcendence, or liberation, equally. If we try to deny our vulnerability, we lose touch with our heart. If we fail to realize our indestructibility, we lose access to enlightened mind. To be fully human means standing willingly and consciously in both dimensions. As Joseph Campbell would say, you become master of both worlds. This makes human existence an extremely interesting crossroads.